Alright, so today is a little bit bittersweet because I'm going to be talking about a book that I was really excited about and I just did not love it the way I wanted to. It's My Plain Jane by, hold on, there's 3 authors, I can never remember all of them, by Cynthia Hand, Jodi Meadows, and Brodi Ashton. The thing about this is it is the true story of Jane Eyre, and I picked up this one because I loved its predecessor. My Lady Jane is hilarious, and this may be one of the few instances where the book cannot do it justice because the narrator is amazing. What these authors have done with both books is they pick characters from history, or in this case, from a book, and they kind of turn it on its ear and just make it sort of like a satire. So My Lady Jane is about Jane Grey, and then My Plain Jane, as I said, is about Jane Eyre. I'm trying to decide if some of my problem was because I did not remember enough about Jane Eyre to know where we were supposed to go, and so I wasn't sure if we were hitting certain markers, because that's kind of what they did in My Lady Jane, is they gave you historical elements, but in the interim, they made up how these people got there, or kind of the real reason, the true story of actually like what those historical events were. And so that's what I was expecting with My Plain Jane, and I wasn't sure because I loved Jane Eyre, or I should say I remember loving Jane Eyre. As I said, I could not remember all the elements. I knew there was a ghost element. I knew she was a governess. I knew she had, I think she was an orphan, some kind of past. But then there were times where I was definitely mixing it up with Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. I wasn't sure if part of the problem was I was expecting things, but I wasn't sure if what we were given was something that was actually there. It's kind of more of a ghost story. And they do preface the book by saying, this is not the story you know. So it's not like I was misled. I just assumed it wasn't the story I thought I knew. But they really did not, from what I can remember, they did not follow the plot of Jane Eyre. Back to the ghosts. So it's really about, not even a ghost story, but it's about ghost hunters. It focuses on Jane Eyre and Charlotte Brönte, which, if you know your literature, Charlotte Brönte wrote Jane Eyre, and they are friends, they go to school together, and it starts off with the murder of Mr. Brocklehurst, which I still am unclear as to his relation to the school. I know they've said it, but I've forgotten it because I read like 20 books at a time. So he's not the headmaster, he doesn't own the school, but he's some kind of authority figure that says yes to things and no to things, and he mistreats the girls at this school. It's a boarding school, and everybody hates him, and so it opens with the mystery of who killed Mr. Brocklehurst. All the girls are like, who did it? And then you're wondering, what does Jane Eyre know? Because she's kind of a cuckoo bird, because she talks to herself all the time. Well, she talks to herself because she can see ghosts. So we start there. And as I said, it focuses on Jane and Charlotte, but then, so they have their POVs, but then there's also Alexander Blackthorne, I think that's his last name. It's, give me a moment while I double check. It's, or Alexander Blackwood, that's it. Alexander Blackwood. So he is a member, or he's the star agent for this ghost agency that they basically help relocate ghosts. He learns of Mr. Brocklehurst's death, so he is sent by, again, I forget, it's another historical figure. Give me a moment. And I'm back! I really ought to write down all the names of the characters because, as I said, I read like 20 books a week. Not really 20, more like 5. But things tend to get lost in translation. So, Alexander works for Duke Wellington, who is also a historical figure. And at this point, there is a new king, and this king does not think that this ghost society is necessary, but Duke Wellington is determined to make sure it does not go under. Anyways, he has sent Alexander to Lowood, which is a school. He manages to capture Brocklehurst, but he also notices that Jane is a seer. And not only is Jane a seer, but she is a beacon, which is like a step up from a seer because she attracts ghosts. Like, ghosts are drawn to her, and she has a certain amount of control over ghosts, which normal seers do not. So he goes about trying to enlist her to be part of the society, but all she wants to do is become a governess, which is how we get back into Jane Eyre. Anyways, so when Charlotte realizes that Jane is a seer, she gets a little defensive because she thought she was Jane's best friend, and she realizes that all these weird conversations that she's heard and seen Jane having are really Jane talking to her dead best friend, Helen Burns. So Jane goes off to work for Mr. Rochester, and this is when I'm thinking, all right, we're finally getting into Jane Eyre, and it's really not. Obviously, weird things are happening, and that was one thing I did remember. Actually, that's not even from Jane Eyre. That's from Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights has the ghost aspect. But, anyways, so things are kind of funky, but nothing is explained. Jane does begin falling for Mr. Rochester, and it seems that Rochester is falling for her. And then in the meantime, Charlotte is trying to figure out how to get out of Lowood, how to become part of this ghost hunting society. And so she packs up her bags, and she's like, I'm going to go and basically ingratiate myself into Alexander's quest to get Jane to work for them. I'm going to make sure that he sees me as an indispensable part of everything. And so she manages to work herself and him, as well as her brother Branwell, who, the thing about seeing ghosts is maybe some of these seers are born with the ability to see ghosts, but for the most part, they can see ghosts after having a near-death experience for themselves. So her brother Branwell had a near-death experience, so now he's being recruited, but he's an idiot. So she manages to get herself, Branwell, and Alexander into Hawthorne, and her attempts at getting Jane to join the society fail. So then they all get kicked out of the manor. So now we're back at Jane, and Rochester is like, I love you, marry me, and he puts a necklace around her that has a spirit in it, which then possesses her. And that is something that the people of the society do, is when they capture a spirit, like, if you handle it improperly, you can become possessed. So Jane is now possessed, and she's on the verge of marrying Mr. Rochester when the trio comes back and they interrupt the wedding, and we realize that Mr. Rochester has been possessed as well by his dead brother. He didn't actually love Jane. It was the brother who was taking over. And we finally figure out the mystery of the house is that Mr. Rochester's wife has been locked away in the attic, and actually, I am wrong. We do not know that he is possessed yet. They interrupt the wedding, and then they discover Rochester's wife in the attic, and he said that he had locked her away because she was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Well, Charlotte is like, I don't think she's crazy, I just think she's tired. Then they determine, well, maybe the problem is Rochester is inhabited. Rochester is possessed. So yes, then we find out that he's possessed by his dead brother. And so this is where you really veer from Jane Eyre, obviously, because in Jane Eyre, Rochester and Jane get married. So then he and his wife, who at one point had been a seer, actually a beacon as well, they're united. But the problem is the Duke of Wellington, we realize, is the ultimate villain of the novel, and he has been using, well, for one, he had killed Alexander's father. And then for 2, he had been using ghosts to inhabit certain authority figures, and his next goal was to possess the new king, and so that he essentially would be king. He would have all the power. The thing is, like, he has influence. Like, you can communicate with the spirit. Like, it's not like once they step into someone else's body, they don't know who they are anymore. No, they are then in control. So as long as he knows the spirit who is possessing so-and-so, then he can have ultimate rule. So now it's all about stopping him. Well, the problem, again, is that Alexander, who by this point Charlotte realizes she's in love with him, has disappeared because Wellington has attempted to kill him. He is then rescued by the Rochesters, whose house has been burned down by one of their servants, which goes back to Jane Eyre, I think. Sometimes these authors put in things from other novels, so some of it's a little Wuthering Heights, some of it's Jane Eyre. But anyways, one of the servants has burned the house down. It's really not important, but it's just going to show how they're trying to connect and tie in the actual novel. They rescue Alexander, and then they all go to prevent the king from being possessed, but they're all too late. And then part of the group, so Charlotte and Branwell stay to continue trying to take away the ring from the king so that he is no longer possessed, while the others chase after Wellington. Fights ensue, end of story, all the good guys win. And then there's an epilogue, which introduces... So the thing is, again, there's a lot of the things. The thing is, Jane still loves Rochester, even though she did not fall in love with this Rochester, and he is living his HEA with his wife. At the very end of the novel, we're introduced to his son, who is much more age-appropriate and has had no mention in the entire novel, but had been sent away when the Rochesters realized that things were not all fine and dandy. And so that's where we end. As I said, it's not about Jane Eyre. It's not even about, like, filling in gaps. It's about creating an entire new story, which is fine. That's what we do as writers. But I thought this one was a little absurd. Honestly, I think by completely recreating the story, they lost it. And I like ghost stories. I've told you, I like ghost stories. But I thought the ghost aspect completely overwhelmed the novel. And then in the author's attempt to make it humorous, like I said with Branwell, he's a complete moron. And so in their attempts to create funny situations, humorous characters, they just lost the plot. Like, they went too far. And, I guess I liked Charlotte. I thought all the characters, honestly, were really annoying. Except for Helen Burns, actually. I thought she was quite funny the whole time. The only, going back to the humor aspect, I thought the most and only successful aspects of the humor were when they would reference other novels or other points in history that could not have existed. Like one time, Rochester's wife, she starts referencing Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, talking about, like, a basilisk and, like, a polyjuice potion. It's really funny because we all know what she's talking about. But the other characters are like, huh? Or one time, the authors referenced Lord of the Rings and my precious. And it's just really, it was so funny the way they just kind of snuck it in there, and then they were done. On the whole, I thought this one was unsuccessful in its humor, unsuccessful in its retelling, and like I said, there was just too much going on. Because it starts with Brocklehurst, which he is pretty much forgotten, and the mystery surrounding him is completely forgotten until the very end, when it's kind of like, oh yeah, we never addressed who killed Mr. Brocklehurst. I mean, literally, that's almost what they said. It's like Charlotte and Jane are sitting down, and Charlotte's like, well, whatever did happen to Mr. Brocklehurst? So there's that, and then there's all of this ghost stuff. Then, yeah, there are the characters that I guess are supposed to be comic foils, but you can't have a comic foil when everybody's a comedian. Like Branwell, who... his idiocy served no purpose except to cause problems, and there were enough problems. And then there was Wellington, who, I guess historically, he is not a favorable figure, and so you're like, well, in this story, is he a favorable figure or not? So, but he's kind of forgotten too, but then there's also the mystery of Alexander's father and who killed him, and then there's the mystery of what's going on at Thornhurst or Thornfield. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name because there's just so much going on in my head. And then there is trying to get Jane to join the society, and then there's Charlotte trying to figure out how can she stay with the society even though she can't see ghosts, and really how can you be part of a ghost hunting society when you can't see ghosts. And then there's Helen Burns, and then there's kind of all the background involving ghosts, and like, because, you know, the whole idea is they're supposed to relocate these ghosts. Well, relocate them to where? So what happens after you trap a ghost inside of a talisman? And then, so it's like, well, we have this one room that is just full of talismans. You know, basically we just have ghosts hanging out. And then we have this other room that's supposed to be like the crossover room, but because we don't have a beacon, we don't ever do that. But actually, you know, the whole problem was Wellington, he wasn't sending all the ghosts through. He was cherry-picking ghosts to keep so that he could make them possess other people for his own purposes, and it was just a lot. I had just started listening to My Plain Jane, I think around the time that I did my Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes review. So I think I went from Ballad to My Plain Jane, and at that time, I think I'd only gotten like 2 or 3 chapters in. I did really like it. I thought it was super funny, but not long after that, it lost me. And I actually skipped. I think I got halfway through. My big thing with stories, with books, is what is the point? You know, every now and again, I'm fine with having a tangent chapter, because sometimes you just need that to maybe do some character development, maybe just kind of take a breath from all the craziness. But I felt like there were far too many of those chapters. I could not figure out really what the aim of the novel was at that point. So that is when I skipped ahead. There were too many plot points. And you just lost the story. Or, you know, they lost the reader because it took too long to answer anything, especially with Thornfield and Rochester and Jane Eyre. They never answered anything to the very end. They didn't attempt to answer anything. And I'm like, this is what you're basing your story off of, is Jane Eyre. So how can you completely leave out the entire Jane Eyre story except for Jane falling in love with Rochester? So the final thing that really bothered me about this book, and this is completely trivial, is Charlotte's penchant to wear glasses on the little stick, and how she was always having to do this. Like, she couldn't see anything unless she had her glasses up, but she wouldn't wear glasses because basically she's vain and she didn't like how they look. But all the constant mentions of these stupid glasses, how she couldn't find them, or how stupid they made her look, like having to lift them up and down, or like, you know, when they're trying to get the ring off the king's finger so he'd be unpossessed, how she drops them and that kind of ruins their whole plan. And I'm like, I'm so sick of these glasses. Like, get contacts, lady. I know she can't get contacts, even in the context of this book. I don't know if they could fit that in. Holy cow, you know, there's, you know when there's a problem with a book when you start focusing on the minutia. And so this one isn't one that I would necessarily not to read, but I guess I would say read it before My Lady Jane, because if you read it after, you're going to be let down, because you're going to be expecting something better. Because My Lady Jane, not only was it hilarious, they just did a much better job at fitting their story into the real story, and it just flowed better. I thought it all made more sense. There are definitely some really weird parts. Obviously, I put it down. I put it down a couple times. Whenever I got in my car and that started up, I was like, oh crap, that's what I'm listening to? I really don't want to listen to it, but I'm going to because I need to finish it. But yeah, so today's was pretty bittersweet. It just hurts my heart when I look forward to a book, or even more so when I start the book and it's great, and then it just drops off the cliff. But it does make for good talk, because this was one that I could get passionate about. Yeah, there are definitely some books that it's been very hard to want to talk about, because not only did I dislike them, but there just wasn't anything to get me going. And if I'm not going, you're not going. That's it. I hope you liked this one. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree. I think they have another one called My Calamity Jane. I only saw it when I was trying to look up the authors' names, and so I haven't seen that in any of my libraries. I haven't seen it on my library apps. I'll look into it again. So yeah, we'll see if I ever get around to it. All right, well, I hope I didn't bore you too much, and I'll see you next time. Bye!